Back when I was 8, I had a bad attitude and a doll named Spencer. Spencer was my everything back then. I took Spencer to the sandbox, to the store, even to school. Spencer was filled with whatever asbestos-filled stuffing they put in dolls back then, which added to his charm. You didn't really need to put much detail on a doll whose lumps created its own facial expressions, but he still had a tiny little bit of detail. Spencer had 2 stupid-looking rosy dots for his cheeks. I never really understood why people thought to use those perfectly round rosy dots to signify cheeks on toys, but I guess we don't really think about that much when we're kids. Spencer, who I sometimes called Spency, also had a smile that appeared as just a 2-inch black line on where the lips should be, as though he was eternally smug or just disappointed. I liked that about him. I could tell him just about anything and he never reacted. Spencer also wore dirty and poorly designed overalls. At 8 years of age, I imagined that he was just a farmer kid that decided to become my best friend. But nowadays, I just have to admit that he was a friggin' creepy thing. Between the floppy legs clad with shoes of unknown style and hands that resembled oven mitts, I just had to outgrow that thing. Anyway, I promise that's important to the story. I was on my way back home from campus, and straight up, I hadn't seen my parents much at all since I started college. First off, I was a journalism major, and that didn't go too far in a blue-collar household, especially when everything was labeled fake news. But still, in my video calls with the family, I assured them that I'd use my journalism for good and not evil. Granted, I'm sure every journalist says that until they see the money that comes with redirection and drama. I digress. I was on my way back home from campus, and I wanted to have a better study environment than my current one, which was bound by whoever my roommate could find to stay the night with him after a party. I hated that guy. Still do. So many times I've lost my train of thought in my studies because the guy was upchucking in the John from too many vodka cranberries or craft beers. Anyways, so my mom is pretty quiet, and my dad spends half his evenings reading up on sports cars, so I figured that home would be the best place to study during the dead week. I can't take full credit, though. I had half a mind to stay with another friend in town who offered up his guest room. Moments before I called him to say that I'm up for staying with him this week, my mom called from their landline and said that she was making her famous apple goop. Boy, does apple goop make a man miss home. With home-cooked food on my mind, I left with a week's worth of clothing and all my school supplies. On the way to their house, I listened to the Beatles, not because I like them, but because I think they're so overrated and annoying. They just keep me awake. I had 10 minutes to go, and boy, my eyes were like sinking ships. I even took to smoking, which I admit was mostly due to my roommate. He told me that smoking helped him with concentration and staying up late for finals. I don't know why I listened to him, considering that there was no way he ever got that method to work. But whatever, I was addicted at that point. So I lit a smoke to stay awake for the last stretch. My parents live on a 3-acre plot in the country off of a gravel road. Their home was painted white from the bottom story to the top, but the porch was a brown-stained cedar that wrapped around the sides of the house. As I pulled into the driveway with a cloud of gravel dust behind me, I could smell the apple goop cooking and Dad's burgers sizzling. Typically, Dad cooked the burgers on the charcoal grill outside, but the grill was overturned in the yard, leaving a pile of ash in the grass. I turned off the Beatles, finally, and pulled out the key. But before I left the vehicle, I saw a shape from behind the curtain in the upstairs bedroom. I waved at it, not knowing if it was Mom or Dad. They didn't wave back. I chalked it up to maybe being some random item Mom left for me next to the window, and just stepped out of the car. I could almost hear Dad saying, "Dadgummit, kiddo, I missed you." I was always kiddo to him, even at 24 years old. Unfortunately, the reunion wasn't as heartfelt as I would have liked, because before I opened the door, I could hear my dad shouting a number of 4-letter words that I feel would tarnish my future job as a journalist if I said them here. I didn't bother knocking on the door or ringing the bell. The bell hadn't worked in ages, and I was too interested in why Pops was swearing to bother waiting for them to open the door. The door led right into the kitchen, where Mom and Dad were cooking dinner. Mom was wearing her oven mitts, and Dad was wearing gardening gloves. "Hey, I don't think those gloves are heat-resistant, Pops," I said with a chuckle. "Danny!" my dad shouted with glee. My mom also said it with a smile. Dad came over to me and embraced me. He was never a physically fit man, and he often bought most of his clothes from the big and tall section at the store, but he felt even more fluffy now, more than ever. I felt almost ashamed that it had been so long since I visited. I would have liked to have been with him during the meals that added those extra pounds. "The gloves are because your father had a little romp with the poison ivy earlier," Mom said as she passive-aggressively stirred a pot of cinnamon sugar glaze. "Well, Margaret, you're the one who asked me to do yard work." "Frank, I asked you to mow, not go all Picasso in the garden. You never wear your gloves either. You always wait till after you get all cut up and blistery to wear your gloves." Dad rolled his eyes and went back to the stove. "What you got there?" I asked him, while pointing at a device on the stove. "Oh, don't get him started." "Oh, Danny boy, this is the latest electric flat-top griddle for the best smash burgers a guy can make. Best of all, no fire, no burning, no need to wait for the coals to get warm or watch for grease flames. This baby can cook a steak in minutes or a burger in seconds." "Well, hey," I said, "I don't discriminate on where the meat is cooked, just as long as it's there." Dad laughed and told me to take a seat at the table. Then he handed me a beer. I sipped carefully on it because I hadn't had too much to eat that day, and I didn't do too good of a job at staying hydrated. I offered one to Dad, which felt surreal to me. He always used to let me have a sip or two of his beer when I was a kid, but I'd been away for so long that this was our first actual drink together. He declined, said he had a fatty liver or something, and needed to watch the liquid bread. All in all, it felt good to be home, and the memories woke me up a little bit. Dad sat down the ketchup, mustard, toasted buns, and veggies in the center of the table. I grabbed a burger, polished the bun with a thick layer of mustard, and then stacked the beef on top with a spare sprinkle of onions. Mom and Dad had all the fixings, and their burgers were about twice the size of mine. As good as the burger smelled and tasted, I really wanted to get to the apple goop as quickly as possible. I chewed down the beef and swallowed before polishing off my beer and noticed that Mom and Dad hadn't touched theirs at all. No, they'd just been staring at me, smiling. "Are you guys going to eat?" I asked them. They both stammered and said they wanted to just make sure that I liked the food. "Don't worry about me," I assured them. "Eat up. I'll be right back, though. I gotta take a leak." Mom gave me a disapproving look. She didn't like bathroom talk at the table, but the beer had loosened my lips. I stood up and walked through the dining room, into the living room, and past the television set, to the bathroom underneath the stairway. The bathroom was filled with the scent of potpourri, and it reminded me of a simpler time in my childhood where deadlines didn't exist, and adulthood was romanticized because we just didn't know any better. As I opened the toilet to do my business, I noticed a bundle of thread and needle at the bottom of the porcelain bowl. I admit I flushed it down. I figured worse things have gone down those pipes anyway. After quickly relieving my bladder, I made my way back to the kitchen to finish off the burger and dig into some apple goop. But as soon as I sat down at the table, I noticed that Mom and Dad had not only finished their burgers, but a smear of goop residue clung to their plates. "Wow, you guys ate that fast," I said. "Well, Danny, you know how we love your mother's apple goop." I nodded and swallowed the last of my burger before serving myself some delicious dessert while Mom and Dad watched. I found it strange that Mom was still wearing oven mitts, but I didn't bother asking why because the cinnamon and apple flavored sugar bomb beneath me called to my stomach. I shoveled in a massive scoop and swallowed, and it was the saltiest monstrosity I've ever eaten in my life. I remember thinking, could Mom just have mixed the salt and sugar? Surely they couldn't have eaten all the goop without it tasting like this. I had half a mind to grab my throat and pucker my lips, but my mom just smiled and asked, "What's wrong, Danny? Don't you like your dessert?" Sure, Mom, it's delicious. I just may need to save it for later. That burger was just super filling, and I just... Nonsense, son. You're here, and it's a celebration. Eat up, Dad exclaimed. Mom nodded with my dad, and I regretted serving myself such a large portion of this stuff. As my blood pressure rose with each salty bite, I finished it off with a healthy pitcher of ice water and belched. My breath felt like the ocean. On the bright side, that horrid mess woke me up more than any energy drink. So, son, ready to see where you're going to be staying for the week? Dad asked me. Sure, Dad. He then cheerfully led me to the living room and up the staircase to my old room. As he opened the door that still had the lyrics to 90s rap songs written in permanent marker on it, my mind flooded with memories of playing video games with my friends and launching toy cars off ramps from the upper window all the way to the bottom of the yard. Unfortunately, my room was a little too much of the same as when I was a kid. The walls were covered in posters of musicians, from rappers to grunge bands. They hadn't even removed my clothes from the side closet, nor had they sold my lava lamps in a garage sale. Even my old RC car sat next to its controller. My bed still had its old sheets, which featured mutant ninja turtles fighting in fancy armor. But sitting right in the center next to my plush old pillow was Spencer in his stitched-on overalls. Pops? Why the heck is Spencer on the bed? Well, shucks, son, we thought it would be kind of cool for you to remember how things were before you left to engineering school. No, it's fine, it's just that I stopped. I could see my dad's frown, and I knew he meant only well. Don't worry about it, Dad. It's pretty charming, and I had some good times with that old thing. His mood brightened, and he slapped me on the back with a fatherly hand. Well, Danny, I'm just going to step down the stairs to the Davenport and watch some talking heads. Need anything, just ask me. Sure thing, Dad, I said as I watched him go downstairs. Then it hit me. He said engineering school. Between my mom putting salt in the apple goop and Dad forgetting that I'm going to be a journalist, I must say that I started wondering about early onset Alzheimer's. My parents weren't too old, but they were creeping up there. I made a mental note to prod with that question the next day. Then I chucked the stupid doll into the closet where it belonged. Well, no, it really belonged in the trash. One of my assignments for finals was to put together a report of local newspaper history. We were delving into journalism history at a local level, and each student could pick the school they attended when they were younger. I chose my old school, and it was actually my parents' old school as well. It helped that Dad kept several newspapers from his days in class, as did I. I would have waited until the next day to ask him, but I was on such a roll with my writing that I couldn't pass up the chance to knock out a couple more pages. Unfortunately, I hit a snag in my research and needed some more of my dad's old files. I shut my laptop and started to get out of bed when I heard a scratching noise coming from the closet. Now, we had issues with mice in the past when I was younger, but never in the closet. I grabbed a wooden baseball bat from my days in Little League and readied it as I approached the closet door, counting 1, 2, 3. I opened it in a flash, but there were no signs of mice, none at all. I just saw a bunch of old clothes and that freaking Spencer doll staring at me with those fake eyes. The thing creeped me out so much that I threw it in the hamper. A few minutes later, I headed downstairs to get some old newspapers from Dad, and maybe a mousetrap or two. I stepped on the first step of the stairwell and was greeted with one of the many old and familiar creaks that I remembered in childhood. I recalled fondly the many times I knew when Mom and Dad were coming because they each had their own personalized stair creak. At the end of the stairs, I could see the light from the television, and it was illuminating the path before me. But when I made it to the bottom of the stairs, Dad wasn't watching his talking heads. No, he was watching television static. And he was smiling as though it were the funniest Monday night talk show he'd ever seen. Dad? I asked. I had heard of sundowner syndrome before, where many people with dementia tend to have episodes of confusion as the sun goes down, and I must admit, it hurt my heart to see him in that way. Dad turned towards me and smiled. and he said, "Hey, son, I was kind of spacing out there for a minute. I couldn't find the remote." "Sure," I said. "Want me to set up the TV for you?" The satellite box had a channel selection function, so I figured I could use that to give him at least something to watch if he couldn't find the remote. He told me to go ahead, so I knelt at the box and selected a talk show from one of the many hosted by people named Jimmy. "Say, Dad, where do you keep the mouse traps?" "Why, you hearing mice go at it again?" "Yeah, I think so. You don't have to get up, though. Just point me to where they are." "Top shelf of the pantry." "Thanks, Dad." I hugged him. He patted me on the back, still wearing those gloves. "Sure thing, sport. Just try to keep quiet so you don't wake up your mother." There was a full pack of mouse traps at the top shelf, just as he said. So at least he was still remembering the little things if he truly was dealing with some sort of early onset dementia. But I did notice a severe lack of food on the shelves. It took me a good few minutes to even find a chocolate bar. I stuffed the traps in my pocket and unwrapped the bar before throwing the wrapper in the trash can. I hesitated, though, because in the trash sat 2 unfinished burgers and a pile of uneaten apple goop. I couldn't blame them for throwing the goop out, but the burgers? I peered around the corner and sighed. There was something simple, endearing, yet sad about seeing my dear old dad start to mentally diminish. I had hardly seen or talked to Mom that night, but I don't think my heart could have taken watching her go through this also. I couldn't go back up to my room without Dad's school documents, so I stopped by the bookshelf in the living room and fished out a couple of old yearbooks and school papers. My parents kept everything well labeled, so I found them with ease. Hugging my dad one more time, I went back upstairs and closed the door behind me. I'd be lying if I said I didn't fear that Spencer would be sitting there in the closet staring at me. It took me a second to muster the courage to even open the closet door, but Spencer was still in the laundry hamper, much to my relief. I felt so stupid fearing a dumb doll like that, but for what it's worth, some people are afraid of clowns, and I think that's just ridiculous. I pulled out one of the mouse traps, took some of the nougat I saved from the chocolate bar earlier, and baited it before laying it in the middle of the closet and closing the door. Back to work. I laid in my bed, which was a twin bed. My legs now dangled off of it, and if I wasn't careful, I could easily roll off the bed in the middle of the night. But it was just as comfortable as I ever remembered. I propped my head up a little bit and opened my laptop, and a couple books as well, and I got to work. The clock struck 12, and I began to feel tired again. I thought about going to bed, but only one book remained, and boy was I determined to finish that. This one was labeled The Class of '95, and it had some girth to it. The book was probably 4 inches thick, boasted slick pages and detailed photographs. Tempted to go through the whole thing, I double-checked the clock and decided that I'd just find the pictures of the team assigned to the school paper, and I'd call it a night. With no table of contents to the book, I flipped through quite a few pages before finding something that caught my eye. And no, it wasn't the pictures of the school paper. Before I could look further, I heard an unfamiliar squeak at the top of the stairs. I dog-eared the page, a sacrilegious act I once promised I'd never do, and cautiously approached the door to my room. The squeak came again. Opening the door, I peeked into the darkness at the top of the stairs, and, well, there's something quite ominous about a dark stairwell, which made me quite glad for the illumination of my dad's show, which bounced and reflected off the walls. I didn't see anybody to the left or to the right of me. "Dad? Mom?" I called out with a wavering voice. "Are you all good, son?" Dad said from the living room, his voice echoing through the stairwell. Yeah, I'm fine, Dad. You're still up? It's midnight." "Yeah, son, this talk show guy sure is funny." "Sure, Dad," I replied and went back to my room. It could have just been the house creaking, but I know better than that now. As I closed the door behind me and traveled back to bed, I felt an excruciating pain shoot from my foot all the way up to my leg. If it weren't for the thought of my dear old mom sleeping, I would have filled that whole house with an orchestra of swear words. I hesitated to look down because I knew what I was stepping on. It wasn't no tiny plastic building block. When the sticky liquid slid down the sides of my foot, I had to check. Sticking from the bottom of my poor foot all the way through the top of it was a sewing needle. Shuddering, I hobbled towards my backpack, where I kept a small first aid kit. Inside the first aid kit were bandages, a pair of surgical pliers and scissors, alcohol swabs, and peroxide. I pride myself on being just about prepared for anything, and in that compact kit, I had everything I needed to remove the needle from my fully impaled foot. I prepped by telling myself that men back in the days of the Civil War, where amputations and disease reigned supreme, they would have laughed at me for the tiny tear traveling down my cheek. It didn't work, though, so I tried another route and pretended it was just a splinter. The needle had gone fully into the bottom of my foot, so I couldn't grip the eye of the needle with the pliers, but there did happen to be a long piece of thread hanging from it. I grabbed the thread and tried to pull it out. Bad idea. The tip of the needle only protruded more through the top of my foot, and the pulling only made the pain worse. I decided to grip the tip of the needle instead and pull hard and fast. That was also a bad idea, but, well, it worked. A pathetic splatter of blood came with it and onto my mutant Ninja Turtle blanket. The alcohol swab, though it was imperative to use to clean the wound, was almost worse. Now, clad in a bandage on the top of my foot and another on the bottom, I was ready to get back to work, if I could just forget about the pain. As I opened the book back to the dog-eared page, I heard that squeak again from just outside the room. Looking at my foot as though it were some sort of battle wound, I decided it was just a house creaking, so I gave my foot a rest. The picture I found interesting in the page was of the boys' basketball team for grade 9. 10 kids stood in a row. Some held basketballs while others crossed their arms or took a knee. The note on the side of the picture read, "Students from left to right, Sam Carnegie, Bradley Bennett, Stephen Carraway, Kyle Green, Spencer Sutton, Mason." The name Spencer was not only familiar, but the boy himself appeared familiar. From his blank stare to the pencil-thin lips, I wanted to learn more about Spencer, so I delved deeper. Spencer played in most of the games that year, often assisting at food drives sponsored by the school. Most of the time, his father's donations from their own personal farm led to the school having more than enough for the community. Spencer also won first prize in a Pimp My Tractor contest, where kids would decorate tractors of local farmers with wreaths, spray paint, and whatever else the kids could find to decorate. The clock struck 2 in the morning, and I couldn't find much more on Spencer. So considering if Spencer was about 15 years old in 1995, with this year being 2020, he'd be about 40 years of age, which meant he most definitely had a social media account, and he probably posted a lot of dead memes throughout the week. I opened the laptop and logged into my own social media account, ready to search for Spencer's account. But the noise came again. My foot didn't feel so bad anymore, so I opted to check it out, while keeping most of my weight on the other foot. As I hobbled towards the doorway, the squeaking grew louder. Grabbing the door handle, I swung it open and saw nothing but the glow from the television downstairs. I stepped forward to flip on a light and inspect the area, but my toe grazed something soft that didn't feel like carpet. I looked down and saw the green fabric of my mother's oven mitts. "Mom?" I whispered. "Dad?" I didn't hear a reply from downstairs. I figured he had gone back to sleep, but I decided to check on him. I took several steps down the stairs, not all the way though. I just wanted to peek and see if he was sleeping yet. He wasn't. Instead, that same smile lay frozen on his face as the television set appeared frozen on a "Are you still watching?" prompt. My heart sunk into my bowels and my foot began to throb, so I I backed away slowly and carefully up the stairs, leaving the mitts at the doorway, and I closed the door. Honestly, I wanted to lock the door, but I couldn't because my dad had a strict no locked doors policy in the house, and that stuck long after I left for college. I loved my parents, but I couldn't shake the bad feeling brewing within me. Climbing back in bed, I propped my foot up on a pillow and finished my search for Spencer Sutton. The name Spencer must not have been too popular in the 90s, as I only found one in the nearest city. In his profile picture, he wore overalls, and according to his bio, he spent 2 years in engineering school. But rather than pursuing a career in engineering, he started to work as a night watchman for a local warehouse. I heard a snap from the closet, and I sighed. I was totally happy to rid myself of the scratching mouse, but with so many interruptions already, I just wanted a moment of silence to finish my work. Nevertheless, I swung my legs off the bed and opened the closet door. Purely dumbfounded, I rubbed my eyes hard. I couldn't find the mousetrap. The clock read 2 in the morning. I knew I needed sleep, but I'd been up late many times before, studying for finals, writing reports, and I'd never been so disoriented. Wait, I muttered to myself as the picture of Spencer Sutton in overalls caught my eye. I suppose that investigative journalism isn't really my strong suit, considering it took me so long to draw the parallels, but I didn't waste any more time, and I tore through the hamper as fast as I could, all while mentally calling myself an idiot. At the bottom of the hamper lay my doll Spencer, in his overalls with that creepy blank smile. On his foot was the mousetrap. On his cheek was a stitched teardrop. I immediately slammed the door shut and I leaned against it, but Spencer Sutton's photograph called out to me. The resemblance was uncanny. But I had that doll 20 years ago. Spencer Sutton's overall photograph had to have been recent. The scratching started from the closet again, and I felt a lump rise in my throat to the point where swallowing became the hardest thing to do. I needed to get the thing out of there and as far away from me as possible. I looked around the room with a frantic gaze as the scratching grew louder, and the first item that stood out to me was the lava lamp. The pain in my foot no longer bothered me as the adrenaline spiked and my heart throbbed against my rib cage. I wielded the lava lamp like Mel Gibson in that one movie with the kilts, and I opened the door as fast as I could. Spencer was sitting there with the mousetrap in his lap, this time with another teardrop stitched to the other side of his face. I smacked him with the lava lamp, which didn't really seem to do anything to him on account of him being filled with stuffing, but he flopped over just as lifeless as before. That wasn't enough for me, obviously. Something supernatural was occurring, and I wanted nothing to do with it. I seized it by its floppy, stuffed leg, and I opened the window, and I chucked him outside as far as possible from me before slamming the window shut and locking it. On the bed, Spencer Sutton's photograph stared me in the face. I had to know when that photograph was taken. While, I failed that day in my investigative journalism, modern-day search engines kind of helped me shore up my defenses, as I was able to find the phone number to Spencer's current warehouse with ease. And of course, I called it.